The flashlight beam hit the window like a slap. Detective Wade Larkin didn't knock. He tapped the glass with the heavy end of his maglite. 3 sharp raps, the sound of a man who had never once in 15 years been told no and meant it. Behind the wheel of a black Cadillac Escalade, a woman in a charcoal wool coat sat with both hands resting on 10 and 2, watching him in the side mirror with an expression that unsettled him before she even rolled down the window. He didn't know yet that the woman he was about to destroy ran the Baltimore field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He didn't know that 4 hidden cameras stitched into the frame of her vehicle were already recording his breath, his badge number, and the bag of white powder he had palmed out of his vest pocket 30 seconds earlier on Eastern Avenue. Baltimore was drowning that night. Late October rain came down in flat gray sheets, turning Eastern Avenue into a river of orange streetlight and oil. Inside Patrol Unit 19, Wade Larkin drummed his fingers on the wheel while his rookie partner, Officer Trent Halloway, picked nervously at a coffee cup, gone soft with condensation. Larkin was 41 years old, built like a man who had once played high school football and never stopped eating like he still did, with a jaw that always seemed clenched and eyes that measured people the way a butcher measures a side of beef. He had worn the badge long enough for it to stop meaning anything to him except leverage. Halloway was 6 months out of the academy, 23 years old, still carrying the particular innocence of someone who believed the uniform meant something noble. Larkin had spent those 6 months trying to burn that innocence out of him one shift at a time.
"Quiet night,"
Halloway said, wiping fog off his window with his sleeve. "Nights are only quiet if you let them be," Larkin answered, and his eyes drifted across the intersection, the way a hawk's eyes drift across a field. He wasn't looking for danger. He was looking for opportunity, and in Wade Larkin's 15 years on the 9th District, opportunity had a very specific shape. Out-of-state plates. Luxury cars driven by people he'd already decided, before they said a single word, were either too frightened to fight back or too poor to hire someone who could. He had a word for it, the thing he did. He called it collecting. A little cash skimmed here, a vehicle seized there under civil forfeiture, half of it disappearing before it ever reached a property room ledger, and when his arrest numbers dipped low enough to draw a phone call from the captain. A small, clear baggie would appear from nowhere during a search. The old-timers called it dropsy. Larkin had perfected it into an art form. A black Cadillac Escalade eased through the intersection ahead, paint so dark and clean it seemed to swallow the streetlights whole. As it rolled beneath a sodium lamp, Larkin caught a half-second glimpse through the cracked driver's window. A black woman, mid-40s, calm as still water. His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Look at that," he said, nodding toward the SUV. "Probably running product up to Philly, or she's driving somebody else's car. Let's find out. Mitch?" "Wade," Halloway corrected himself. "She's not speeding. Taillights are working. We don't have cause. Cause is whatever I write in the report, Trent." Larkin hit the gas. The cruiser's engine growled, tires hissing against wet asphalt. She drifted over the center line. "I saw it." "You saw it," Halloway repeated, staring down at his lap. "That's right. You saw it, too." The siren cut through the rain like a blade. Inside the Escalade, the woman glanced at her rearview mirror, and her face didn't change at all. Her name was Corinne Ashby, and she had spent 21 years climbing a ladder that had not been built with her in mind. Field agent in violent crimes out of Detroit, 6 years in counterterrorism at headquarters, and finally, 8 months ago, the appointment that made her the first black woman to run the FBI's Baltimore field office. She had negotiated with men holding detonators. She had sat across interrogation tables from cartel lieutenants who smiled while describing exactly how they'd kill her family. A traffic stop on a rainy Tuesday did not frighten Corinne Ashby. But she was not naive either. She knew precisely what happened to women who looked like her on dark roads at night, knew it the way she knew her own badge number, independent of any authority sitting in her glove compartment. She signaled, eased the Escalade onto the shoulder beneath a flickering pawnshop sign, shifted into park, and laid both hands flat on the wheel. In the visor above her head, tucked behind the sunshade where it had ridden for 11 years, was a photograph, a young black officer in a Detroit PD uniform, squinting into sunlight, one arm slung around a girl of maybe 9. Her father, Curtis Ashby, killed responding to a robbery call 3 blocks from their house when Corinne was in the 4th grade. She didn't look at the photo now. She never needed to. She reached up instead and pressed a small, discreet button built into the rearview mirror housing, and a nearly invisible blue light blinked awake. 4 cameras, hidden in the mirror frame and the door pillars, began recording high-definition audio and video, encrypting and streaming it in real time to a secure bureau server 11 miles away. She watched in the side mirror as a heavy-set officer climbed out of the cruiser, one hand resting on his holster, the way men rest a hand on something they want you to notice. "Let's see what you've got, detective," she whispered, to no one, and her voice did not shake at all. Larkin's flashlight found the driver's window and stayed there, angled to blind. He wrapped the glass again. Ashby lowered it, and the wet October air rushed into a cabin that smelled faintly of leather and rain. License, registration, insurance. No greeting, no reason given. "Good evening, officer." She read the nameplate on his chest, Officer Larkin. "Before I reach for anything, I'd like to know why I was stopped. You crossed the center line, twice, and it smells like you might have had a few." He hadn't smelled anything. He was watching her face for fear, and finding none, which only sharpened something ugly in him. "Hand over the documents, or I pull you out of this car for resisting. I haven't had a drink tonight, and I didn't cross any lines," she said, evenly. "My license is in my purse, on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for it slowly. Is that acceptable?" "Just get it," he snapped. He hated the way she spoke to him, like a teacher correcting a child. He especially hated it coming from a black woman in a car that cost more than his yearly salary. She retrieved a Maryland driver's license, standard issue, though flagged in a federal database Larkin had no access to and wasn't checking anyway, and passed it through the window. He shined his light on the plastic without really reading it. "Whose car is this?" A little smirk. "Bit out of your price range, isn't it? What do you do?" "I work for the federal government." He barked out a laugh. "Sure you do. Sort mail down at the post office?" He straightened, tapping the license against his palm. "I'm going to run this. Sit tight. Hands where my partner can see them." He marched back to the cruiser and typed her name and plate into the mobile terminal. The wheels spun. 10 seconds passed, unusually long, and then a message appeared that made him frown. "Restricted tag. Do not detain. Contact DAT for verification." "System's glitching again," he muttered, and in his mind, that glitch became something else entirely. Not a federal protection flag, but a ghost plate, the kind cartel couriers ran to dodge automated readers. To Wade Larkin, a malfunction wasn't an obstacle. It was a lottery ticket. If this was cartel money, there'd be cash in that car, and cash that couldn't be traced was cash he could make disappear into his own pocket under the friendly cover of civil forfeiture. "She's dirty," he radioed to Holloway. "System can't even pull her plate clean. We're searching. Wade, we need probable cause for a full search." Holloway's voice came back, strained. "I smell weed. That's all the cause a court needs." He killed the radio before Holloway could argue further, and reached into the lining of his tactical vest, where, 3 weeks old, never logged into evidence, his own private insurance policy, sat a small sealed bag of white crystalline powder he'd taken off a street-level user near the harbor. He palmed it into his left hand and walked back into the rain. "Step out of the vehicle. Officer Larkin, I do not consent to any search." Am I under arrest, or am I free to go? Get out of the car right now, or I break this window and drag you out myself. I smell marijuana coming off this vehicle. That's probable cause. Corinne Ashby's pulse did not move, not by a single beat. She had sat across from men with bombs strapped to their chests. A corrupt patrol officer with a superiority complex was, to her, barely a variable. But he was a dangerous variable, and she had already decided, in the 4 seconds since his flashlight first found her mirror, that she was not going to flash a badge and make him apologize and slink back to his cruiser to go terrorize the next person unlucky enough to cross his path tonight. She was going to let him walk all the way out onto the ledge himself. And then she was going to let gravity do what gravity does. I am stepping out of the vehicle, she said clearly, for the microphones. I am unarmed, and I am complying under duress. She opened the door and stood in the freezing rain, taller than him even in low heels, hands folded in front of her, utterly still. Go stand by my hood. She walked to the cruiser. Holloway stood a few feet off, arms crossed against the cold, and for one flickering second, something like guilt crossed his young face. You don't have to let him do this, she said quietly, her voice reaching only him under the drumming of the rain. Ma'am, just stay quiet and cooperate. It'll go easier. You wear that uniform to protect people, Officer Holloway. Whatever he finds in my car, you and I both know it isn't mine. Your silence, when this reaches a courtroom, will count as complicity. Holloway swallowed and looked away. I don't know what you're talking about. Up at the Escalade, Larkin performed a theatrical search, tossing floor mats, yanking open the center console, but his eyes weren't looking for anything except a place to leave something behind. He leaned his whole upper body into the car, right hand digging loudly through the console, left hand sliding the little bag from his palm into the crease between the passenger seat and the leather armrest, angled just enough to be found on a second glance. He backed out, wiping his palms together like a man disgusted by filth he himself had planted. Well, 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 he called out, voice thick with triumph, and pulled the baggie out with 2 gloved fingers, holding it up in the rain like a trophy. Holloway flinched. He'd known Larkin skimmed cash-off dealers, known he bent reports, but this, planting a felony weight of narcotics on a woman who looked, in Holloway's word, like an accountant, this was a line he hadn't seen his training officer cross so openly before. Looks like we found why you were drifting, Larkin sneered, dangling the bag inches from her face. That's a trafficking weight. Mandatory minimum. State time, sweetheart. Corinne looked at the bag. Then she looked directly into his eyes, and there was no fear in her face at all, no outrage, nothing but a terrible stillness that unsettled him for exactly 1 heartbeat before his ego crushed the doubt back down. That does not belong to me, she said, her voice pitched precisely for the microphones she knew were recording every syllable. You placed that in my vehicle, Detective Larkin. Oh, so now I'm dirty. He laughed and pulled his cuffs off his belt. Turn around. She turned. The steel ratcheted down a full notch tighter than necessary, his little cruelty, meant to draw a wince. She gave him none. Here is where you should understand something about Wade Larkin, because it matters for everything that comes after. He had planted evidence more than 40 times in his career. He had never once been wrong about a target folding. Every person he had ever done this to had cried, or begged, or gone silent with shock. Corinne Ashby did none of those things, and a smarter man would have read that stillness as the loudest alarm bell of his life. Wade Larkin did not hear alarm bells. He had stopped being able to hear them years ago. They dragged her into the 9th District station, under fluorescent light, the color of old teeth. Larkin walked her through the bullpen slowly, wanting an audience, wanting every cop on shift to see his catch. Phones rang. Keyboards clattered. The air smelled like burnt coffee and 40 years of accumulated exhaustion. At the booking desk stood Captain Owen Brannigan, 58 years old, 3 years from a pension he'd started, counting down to the day. nursing a mug of tea with the tired posture of a man who had seen exactly this kind of rot before, and had long since run out of energy to fight it. "What do we have?" he asked, and something in his trained eye already snagged on the mismatch. The tailored coat, the composed posture, the total absence of the panic he'd seen 1,000 times on people who actually had drugs in their car. "Traffic stop," Larkin announced loudly, slapping the bag down on the counter. Swerving, smell of weed, searched the vehicle, found 2 ounces of crystal in the console. "High-end mule cap." Brannigan picked up the bag, glanced at it, then at her. "Name." "I've already provided my license to Detective Larkin," Corinne said. "I suggest you look at it." Larkin dumped her purse on the counter and fished out the license, tossing it to the captain like it was nothing. Brannigan read the name, looked up, looked back down. Something in his gut tightened. "You have a phone call, ma'am," he said carefully. "I'd suggest you use it to call a very good lawyer." "I don't need a lawyer, Captain Brannigan," she said, reading his name tag. "I need these cuffs removed, and I need you to make a phone call on my behalf." Larkin snorted. "Listen to her. Thinks she's at the Ritz." She ignored him entirely, locking eyes with the captain, and her voice dropped an octave, carrying a weight that made the hair on Brannigan's arms rise before she'd even finished the sentence. "My name is Corinne Ashby. I am the special agent in charge of the Baltimore field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The vehicle Detective Larkin unlawfully searched is federal government property. The narcotics he claims to have found were planted by his own hand, an act that has just been captured on 4 separate high-definition federal surveillance cameras hidden inside that vehicle." The bullpen went dead. Keyboards stopped. The ringing phone kept ringing, unanswered, sounding suddenly very far away. Every head in the room turned toward the booking desk. Larkin's smirk didn't melt so much as collapse in on itself, replaced by a pallor that made him look, for the first time that night, like an old man. "Director Ashby," Brannigan said, the mug trembling slightly in his hand.
"Yes, Captain."
Her eyes cut to Larkin and pinned him there like an insect under glass. "And I am formally placing Detective Wade Larkin under federal arrest for deprivation of rights, under color of law, evidence tampering, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." She took a slow breath, and for the first time allowed herself to enjoy the terror blooming in his eyes. "Now take these cuffs off me." For a long moment, the only sound in the entire 9th District station was rain hammering the barred windows. Brannigan stared at the license on the counter, then at the woman standing before him with the composure of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. "I need to verify this," he stammered, reaching for the landline. "Verify it however you like, Captain. But first, remove these cuffs. You are currently holding a federal director hostage under false pretenses, and every minute this steel stays on my wrists widens the blast radius around your career." "Cap, wait!" Larkin's voice cracked with real panic now, his bravado finally splitting open.
"She's lying. Look at her, she's playing you."
"That's a fake ID. Mules run high-end fakes all the time. I found that crystal in her console myself. I saw her swerving." Brannigan hesitated, the key an inch from the lock. Then Corinne spoke again, quieter this time, and somehow that was worse. "Do it, Captain." The cuffs clicked open. She brought her hands forward and rubbed at the red lines the steel had left, unhurried, then reached into her purse and pulled out a matte black satellite phone, the kind issued only to senior federal executives. She dialed a single number. "Ashby, code blue, Baltimore, 9th District. Secure the perimeter. Secure my vehicle on Eastern Avenue. Bring the tech package." She ended the call and set the phone on the counter with a small, deliberate click, the kind of sound that in that silent room landed like a gavel. Larkin let out a scoffing, desperate laugh, eyes darting around the bullpen for an ally he was no longer sure he had. "Code blue."
"What is this? A movie?"
15 years on the job and you think you can walk in here and scare me with a satellite phone? Corinne turned to face him fully, and here is where she made a choice that would haunt every officer in that room for years afterward. A choice she made not out of mercy, but out of something colder and more precise than mercy. Detective Larkin, before my team gets here and takes your life apart, piece by piece, I'm going to give you one opportunity. She gestured to the frozen room. Brannigan at the desk, Holloway by the doors, a dozen night shift officers standing motionless with their hands still hovering near duty belts they hadn't drawn. Tell everyone here exactly what happened tonight. Put your official account on the record, out loud, right now. How did the stop go? Where did you find the drugs? Holloway, standing near the doors, looked like he might be sick. Wade, he whispered. Don't.
Shut up, Trent.
Larkin stepped forward, chest out, grasping for the authority draining out of him like water through his fingers, and he told the room a story. He told them about a Cadillac crossing the double yellow on Eastern Avenue, about the strong odor of burnt marijuana, about a lawful search, a suspect who was uncooperative and nervous, and 2 ounces of crystal methamphetamine tucked deep in the center console, a trafficking weight. He said it loud, performing for the thin blue line he was trying to summon back to his side, and when he finished, he crossed his arms and glared at her. That's the truth. That's the sworn testimony of a decorated detective, and it's going to put you in a cage. Corinne listened to the entire fabrication without blinking once. A small, almost pitying smile touched the corner of her mouth. Thank you, Wade, she said, softly. The reinforced doors of the precinct blew open. A wave of tactical agents in Navy windbreakers stamped FBI in bold yellow letters surged into the bullpen. A dozen of them, moving with the practiced calm of people who had done this 100 times and would do it 100 more. Every patrol officer in the room slowly raised their hands away from their belts without being told to. A tall man in a tailored gray suit walked in behind them carrying a rugged tablet. Special Agent Miles Thornton, Ashby's second-in-command for 6 years, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he had never once needed to. Director. He glared at Larkin with open contempt. Vehicles secured, data's fully downloaded and decrypted. Good, let's show Captain Brannigan and his men a movie. She turned to the flat screen mounted behind the booking desk, usually reserved for shift schedules. Thornton cast the feed. The screen flared to life with crystal-clear night vision footage from inside the Escalade. The exact timestamp of the stop burned into the corner. The whole precinct watched in silence as Corinne stepped out into the rain, as Larkin's rain-soaked shape leaned into frame, as his right hand rummaged loudly through the console while his left hand rose from his pocket, pinched between thumb and forefinger, and slid a small, clear bag into the crease of the passenger seat. The footage looped once, twice, is triumphant, well playing over it both times like a curse he couldn't take back. Brannigan sank into his chair like something had gone out of him. Larkin stood frozen, mouth opening and closing, staring at the screen, then at the armed agents ringing him, then, finally, at her. You, he choked out. You set me up, I didn't set you up, Detective, she said, and her voice rang with a crushing finality that seemed to fill the entire bullpen. I simply handed you the rope. You tied the noose yourself, put it around your own neck, and jumped. Agent Thornton, arrest this man. Thornton spun him around and kicked his legs apart, and the sharp ratchet of federal handcuffs echoed off the cinder block like a rifle shot. But this, the humiliation, the arrest, the footage on the screen, this was only the surface of what Corinne Ashby was after, and if you think the story ends there, you don't yet understand how deep this went, or how long she had been waiting for exactly this rainy Tuesday to arrive. The interrogation room at the 9th District smelled of stale sweat and floor wax and 40 years of desperate men lying across a bolted-down steel table. Wade Larkin had broken dozens of suspects in that room, using exactly the tactics that had just been used against him. Intimidation, manufactured evidence, the slow crushing weight of consequences he controlled. Now he sat on the wrong side of it, badge gone, gun gone, tie confiscated, looking smaller than his own uniform. Corinne walked in with Thornton behind her. Carrying a manila folder, she dropped onto the table, with a thud that made Larkin flinch. "Let's skip the formalities, Wade." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, folding her hands. "You're facing federal charges that will bury you. Deprivation of rights under color of law, up to 10 years. Evidence tampering, another 20. Possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Because let's be honest, planting drugs on someone is a form of distribution. Carries a mandatory minimum. Take this to trial and I will personally see to it. You spend 3 decades in a maximum security federal facility surrounded by men who have very specific feelings about corrupt cops." Larkin's Adam's apple bobbed. He stared at his cuffed hands. "I want a lawyer. You're entitled to one." She opened the folder and spread a series of high-resolution surveillance photographs across the table, unhurried, letting him watch each one land. "But before you call an attorney to negotiate a deal you will never receive, I want you to understand exactly why I was driving down Eastern Avenue tonight. Did you honestly believe a special agent in charge of the FBI was out on a midnight joyride through your hunting ground, Wade?" His breath caught. Something cold began crawling up the back of his neck. "4 months ago," she continued, "you stopped a man named Marcus Webb on Gove Street. You claimed you smelled marijuana. You searched his trunk and found $83,000 in shrink-wrapped cash. You never logged it into evidence. You seized it under the cover of civil forfeiture, and the paperwork never made it anywhere near the district attorney's office. The money simply vanished, and Marcus Webb went to prison on a manufactured weapons charge you fabricated to keep him quiet. Webb's a mid-level runner for the Highland Avenue crew." Larkin snapped, old instincts flaring. "He had that money coming off product he sold to kids." "Marcus Webb," Corinne said, tapping the photograph, "is a confidential federal informant who has been feeding my division intelligence for 16 months on a cartel money laundering pipeline running through Baltimore's commercial real estate market. That $83,000 was federal bait money, Wade. Every serial number was recorded before it ever touched his trunk." He closed his eyes. A low sound escaped him, something between a groan and a laugh with no humor left in it. He hadn't just shaken down a street dealer. He had robbed the United States government and blown a hole through a cartel investigation years in the making. "Now, here's where your situation moves from catastrophic to hopeless," she said, and her voice dropped into something almost gentle, which made it worse. "We traced that bait money, Wade. You didn't keep it all, did you? A street-level tax collector always kicks something up to the crown." She slid a new photograph across the table. Larkin in a booth at a steakhouse in Fells Point, across from a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit, a thick manila envelope between them. Judge Palmer Ashcroft. A man who has dismissed 41 narcotics trafficking cases over the last 3 years, every single one on procedural grounds, warrants that you and your specialized unit happen to right yourselves. Larkin's hands trembled violently against the table. "You're not the mastermind here, Wade. You're a greedy man with a badge who thought he was the biggest predator on the street." Corinne leaned back. "Judge Ashcroft is providing judicial cover for a cartel laundering operation, and he's been using dirty cops like you to seize unmarked cash and eliminate his competition. Your partner, Officer Holloway, is in the next room right now. He's terrified, he's young, and he does not want to spend his 20s in a federal prison. He's already agreed to testify that you routinely planted evidence, that you targeted people based on their race, and that you bragged about your connection to Judge Ashcroft. He walks away clean, Wade, Because he was your unwilling audience, not your partner in this. She closed the folder. The sound made him jump. So here is your only lifeline, detective. You are going to waive counsel for the next 24 hours. My technical team is going to wire you. Tomorrow afternoon, you are going to walk into Judge Ashcroft's chambers, hand him his cut of the money you've been collecting, and get him on tape naming the operation. If Ashcroft finds out I'm wired, the people behind him will kill me. They'll kill my family. If you refuse, Corinne said without a flicker of sympathy, I hold a press conference in 1 hour and release video of a Baltimore police detective planting narcotics on the special agent in charge of the FBI. You'll be the national face of police corruption by tomorrow morning's news cycle. The judge will cut you loose and disavow you within the hour, and you'll stand trial facing a jury that has already watched you commit a federal felony on camera. When you get to prison, the people you locked up on manufactured charges will be waiting in the yard to introduce themselves. She stood and buttoned her coat, looking down at him with something that wasn't quite pity. You wanted to rule the concrete, Wade, but you forgot the one rule of the jungle that actually matters. There is always something bigger than you. She turned for the door. Agent Thornton, give him 2 minutes. If he says no, book him into general population and release the footage to every outlet in the country. His voice broke the silence just as her hand touched the handle. Wait, she didn't turn around. I'll wear it, he whispered to the table.
I'll give you Ashcroft.
The next afternoon, Baltimore sat under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Inside an unmarked federal safe house near the harbor, the air was thick with stale coffee and the electric hum of surveillance equipment. Larkin sat rigid in a metal folding chair, sweating through a pale blue shirt, while a technician taped a microtransmitter flat against his sternum. Transmitters secure, Director, the tech said, stepping back. Corinne stood by the window, watching rain slick the pavement, then crossed the room and set a thick envelope on the table beside him. $25,000 in marked federal bills, the exact weekly tithe he'd promised. Parameters, Wade. You enter chambers at 4 o'clock sharp. You hand him the envelope. You need him to acknowledge the source, the laundering operation, the shell LLCs, the cartel connection. Vague agreement means nothing in court. Make him brag. Ashcroft's not stupid. He's a sitting judge. He speaks in code. If I push too hard, he'll know something's wrong. Then be a very good actor, Thornton said from the doorway, arms crossed. Because if you walk out of that courthouse without an actionable confession, the immunity deal is gone, and you'll be in a federal holding cell before dinner while every news station in the country runs that footage of you on a loop. Larkin wiped sweat from his forehead and picked up the envelope with a hand that would not stop shaking. He had spent 15 years believing himself untouchable, protected by a badge, and the silence of men just like him. Now stripped of both, he was nothing but bait, and he knew it. And that knowledge sat in his chest, heavier than the wire taped over his heart. I can do it, he rasped. Just be ready if he's got muscle in there. We'll hear every heartbeat, Corinne said. Do not deviate from the script. An hour later, Larkin walked through the marble columns of the Baltimore County Courthouse, waved past metal detectors by officers who had no idea they were letting a walking wiretap into the building. The private elevator carried him to the 4th floor, the domain of senior judges, and the heavy mahogany door of Judge Palmer Ashcroft's chambers loomed at the end of a carpeted hallway smelling faintly of cigar smoke and old money. He knocked twice. Enter. Ashcroft sat behind a massive oak desk, silver hair combed back with surgical precision, eyes cold and patient as a bird of prey, signing documents without looking up. Mitchell. Wade. You're late, and you look terrible. Sweating. Humidity, Your Honor. Larkin sank into the leather wingback chair, feeling the wire against his skin like a brand. He pulled the envelope from his jacket and tossed it onto the desk. 25 from the Highland Sweep, plus the excess we taxed off the transit runners. Ashcroft didn't touch it. He stared at it a long moment, then looked up. You're usually more discreet, and you don't hand me cash directly unless there's a problem. What's the problem? Larkin's heart hammered against his ribs. Stick to the script. No problem, Judge. Things are getting hot. Word on the street is, the feds are sniffing around the Webb arrest, looking for the $83,000 we pulled from his trunk. Ashcroft's eyes narrowed. Then he finally reached out and slid the envelope into a drawer. Let them sniff. That money was never logged. As far as the system's concerned, it doesn't exist. Webb's sitting in a cell on a weapons charge. He isn't talking to anyone.
That's just it.
Larkin pressed, feeling a genuine spike of adrenaline that made the performance easier. If they trace it back, it connects to the cartel money. The Oaxaca people are getting restless about the North Baltimore LLCs. They want to know when the clean money's going to clear. The silence stretched too long. Ashcroft's cold eyes crawled over Larkin's sweating face, his shaking hands, his too fast breathing. You're exceptionally nervous today, Wade, he said softly, rising, walking slowly around the desk until he stood inches from the chair. Are you wearing a wire? Larkin's blood went to ice. What? No, Judge. Come on, stand up. The command cracked like breaking glass. 3 blocks away, in the tactical van, Thornton gripped the console edge. He's making him. Director, we need to breach. Hold, Corinne said, eyes locked on the audio visualizer, watching Larkin's heart rate spike in jagged green lines. Let it play out. Ashcroft patted down Larkin's waist and sides, checking for a device on his belt, missing entirely the microtransmitter woven into his shirt collar and the flat mic taped over his sternum. He stepped back, still suspicious but apparently satisfied. You listen to me, Wade. The aristocratic mask dropped entirely now, replaced by something flatter and colder. You don't worry about the cartel. You don't worry about the LLCs. I handle the shell companies. I launder the cash through commercial properties, and the Oaxaca people get their clean money back. Your only job is to keep the streets quiet, seize the competition's shipments, and bring me my cut. Do you understand? Larkin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had it. The confession, explicit, unmistakable, on tape. I understand, Your Honor. Good. Ashcroft turned back toward his desk. Now get out of my chambers before your paranoia infects me. Actually, Judge. A calm voice from the doorway. Ashcroft spun. The heavy doors had swung open without a sound. Corinne Ashby stood in the threshold, flanked by Thornton and 4 tactical agents, federal badge raised in her left hand. You're going to need to clear your docket for the foreseeable future. Judge Ashcroft stared at her, his aristocratic composure visibly cracking at the seams, color draining from his face until he looked, all at once, frail and very old. What is the meaning of this, he demanded, drawing on decades of judicial arrogance. You cannot simply barge into my chambers. I am a sitting judge of this county. I will have you held in contempt. You can try that from a federal holding cell, Your Honor. She stepped into the room, eyes sweeping the opulent office with open disdain. Agent Thornton, the desk drawer, retrieved the marked funds. Thornton moved past the stunned judge, opened the drawer, pulled the envelope, and compared the top bill's serial number against a manifest on his tablet. Match confirmed, Director. Corinne turned back to Ashcroft. Palmer. Ashcroft, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, and acting as an accessory to narcotics trafficking. You have the right to remain silent. Given what we just recorded on Detective Larkin's wire, I'd strongly suggest you use it. 2 agents stepped forward and took his arms. He didn't fight. The fight had gone out of him the moment the door opened, replaced by the crushing weight of a legacy collapsing in real time. As they cuffed him, he turned his head and locked eyes with Larkin. You miserable, treacherous rat, he hissed, venom dripping off every syllable. Larkin looked at the floor. He had nowhere else to look. He stood there, caught between the fury of a man he'd betrayed and the federal system he'd spent 15 years mocking, and for the first time since the rain hit his windshield the night before, something inside him that had been locked shut for a very long time cracked open just slightly.
"Get him out of here,"
Corinne said, and, as agents led the judge away, she turned her attention to Larkin, who stood by the wingback chair, looking like the hollowed-out shell of the man who had pulled her over. "You got what you wanted," he muttered, staring at nothing. "Ashcroft's finished, the cartel connections exposed. Do I get my deal?" "You get exactly what I promised, Wade." Her voice was cold now, precise. "You won't serve 30 years in a maximum security facility. The U.S. Attorney will recommend 5 years in a low-security federal camp in exchange for your continued testimony against Ashcroft and the extortion ring running out of the 9th District." A flicker of desperate hope crossed his face, and she let it live for exactly 1 second before she crushed it. "But understand me completely. You are stripped of your badge. Your pension is gone. You will never again hold a position of authority over another human being for as long as you live. When you walk out of that camp, you will be a convicted felon, and you will carry the word dirty cop behind your name for the rest of your life." She let that settle over him like a physical weight. "Your partner, Officer Holloway, resigned this morning. He turned state's evidence. He walked away because, somewhere under all that fear, he still had a conscience. You are only cooperating because you got caught, Wade. There is a very wide difference between those two things." She looked at him a long moment, and something passed over Larkin's face that hadn't been there before. Not an apology. He would never manage that, not even now, but something closer to recognition. A man finally seeing the shape of the hole he'd dug for himself. One shovel of contempt at a time, over 15 years, until it swallowed him whole. He opened his mouth to argue, the old instinct rising one last time, and then closed it again. Because for the first time in his career, there was nothing left to argue with. "Take him to processing," she told Thornton, and turned to the tall windows, looking out over rain-soaked Baltimore. The streets looked cleaner from up here. She knew better. Corruption was a weed with roots that ran deep, and pulling Larkin and Ashcroft out of the ground wouldn't fix the whole garden. But it was a necessary pruning, and necessary things are worth doing, even when they don't finish the job. That should have been the end of it. It very nearly was. But 6 weeks later, on a gray Thursday afternoon, Corinne Ashby stood in a federal courtroom in downtown Baltimore, and something happened that no one in that room, not even her, had fully anticipated. The trial moved fast, the way these things do when the evidence is video and audio and impossible to argue with. Ashcroft's attorneys tried everything: motions to suppress, claims of entrapment, an attempt to paint Larkin as an unreliable cooperating witness whose testimony couldn't be trusted because he was, after all, a liar and a criminal. It didn't matter. The footage from Corinne's escalade played on a courtroom screen exactly the way it had played in the 9th District bullpen. And jurors watched Wade Larkin plant a bag of methamphetamine in a federal director's car with his own 2 hands, in real time, in silence broken only by the sound of rain. Larkin took the stand on a Tuesday. He wore a county jumpsuit and looked 10 years older than the man who had tapped his flashlight against Corinne's window 6 weeks earlier. The prosecutor walked him through everything. The traffic stops built on nothing, the seized cash that vanished, the confidential informant he'd nearly gotten killed, the weekly envelopes handed across an oak desk in exchange for judicial cover. And then, on cross-examination, Ashcroft's attorney tried one last desperate maneuver. "Detective Larkin, isn't it true that you fabricated this entire story to save yourself from prison?" Larkin sat with that question for a long moment. Longer than the courtroom was comfortable with. Corinne watched from the gallery, and she saw something in his face she hadn't expected to see. Not defiance, not the old bravado, but something quieter. "No," he said finally. "It's true because I did it. All of it. I spent 15 years telling myself I was keeping the streets safe. I wasn't. I was just the meanest thing on them, and I mistook that for power." He looked past the attorney, toward the gallery, toward nothing in particular. "I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me either. I'm just done lying about what I did. It wasn't an apology." Master manipulators like Wade Larkin rarely manage a clean one, and this book does not pretend he suddenly transformed into a good man in a county jumpsuit under fluorescent light. But it was the truth, spoken plainly, for the first time in longer than he could remember. And in the gallery, Corinne Ashby felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was still clenched. Judge Ashcroft was convicted on all counts 11 days later and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. He never once, in any hearing, admitted wrongdoing. Even standing before the sentencing judge, he spoke of prosecutorial overreach and a rigged system, and something in that refusal told the whole courtroom everything they needed to know about who he really was, and who he had always been. Wade Larkin received his 5 years, as promised, and reported to a low-security federal camp in West Virginia the following spring. Trent Holloway, the rookie who had once whispered, "Don't in an empty parking lot," left the department entirely and now works in victim services for the Maryland Attorney General's office, helping people navigate exactly the kind of system that had once nearly swallowed him whole. Marcus Webb, the informant Larkin had buried under a fabricated weapons charge, walked out of prison 4 months after the trial, his conviction vacated, $83,000 in restitution wired to an account he hadn't touched in over a year. Though no amount of money returns the months a man loses to a lie someone else told about him. 6 months after that rainy Tuesday on Eastern Avenue, Corinne Ashby sat in her office, on the 11th floor of the Baltimore field office, a stack of case files in front of her. Rain. This city seemed to specialize in it. Streaking the window behind her desk. There was a knock. Captain Owen Brannigan stood in the doorway, out of uniform, holding his hat in both hands, the way men of his generation still do sometimes. "Wanted to thank you," he said. Internal Affairs found 6 other officers running variations of Larkin's playbook once your case cracked it open. "We've made changes. Real ones. Body cameras that actually stay on. A review board with community members who can't be talked out of asking hard questions." He turned the hat over once in his hands. "Took someone finally standing still to make the rest of us look at what we'd been letting happen. It usually does," she said. After he left, she sat alone for a while, the office quiet except for rain against the glass, and she reached into her desk drawer and took out a small framed photograph she kept there now instead of tucked behind a visor. Her father in his Detroit PD uniform, one arm around a 9-year-old girl squinting into the sun. She hadn't needed to look at that photograph the night Wade Larkin tapped his flashlight against her window. She had known exactly who she was and exactly what she was doing without needing to be reminded. But she looked at it now anyway, for a long moment. Because some debts you carry your whole life aren't the kind that get repaid by a courtroom verdict. They get repaid one Tuesday at a time, one traffic stop at a time, one person who didn't get to walk away clean because somebody, somewhere, finally decided to stand still long enough to let the truth catch up. She set the photograph back in the drawer, closed it, and picked up the next file on her desk. Outside, Baltimore kept doing what Baltimore does, living, working, getting rained on, mostly unaware that somewhere in a low-security camp in West Virginia, a man who once believed he owned every dark road in this city was finally, quietly, learning what it costs to be wrong.